So part 1, classroom management. I'm going to talk about 6 different areas of classroom management. So if you're looking at your notes, we're going to start with number 1, consistency and routine. Consistency and routine, these are really very important parts of classroom management. These are kind of the basics of classroom management. As teachers, you need to be consistent in your response to discipline and inappropriate behavior. And also, you need to stick to a routine in your classroom, giving the kids a measure of control by knowing what to expect. When they know what to expect, when they know the routine, you're giving them a measure of control in the class, and it'll help with those discipline issues. So, being consistent in how discipline is dealt with, kids are watching you. And they're going to notice if you're inconsistent. If you discipline one child all the time and you let another child slide, they notice that stuff. So they notice it and they're going to think that you're unfair, or they're going to take advantage of your inconsistency. Kids recognize this stuff. So it's important to be consistent. And when you are consistent, you're showing respect for your students. You're showing that each one is important and that each child is going to get the same responses from you. It's a way of showing respect for your students. So be consistent in your discipline, but also be consistent in your praise of students. Sometimes I've noticed this in classrooms, and it's happened to me too. You've got kids, maybe you've got 1 or 2 kids that you really like in your classroom, that you just kind of connect with those kids, and then you've got another child who is just constantly and so you end up maybe even subconsciously praising these kids all the time and disciplining this kid all the time. So you need to be consistent in your praise of your students and in your the discipline of your students. When you're consistent, students will feel secure in their boundaries and it minimizes inappropriate behavior. So be consistent. Next, routine. The next part of this is routine. Have a routine for your class and stick to it. Kids will come to recognize the routine and they will flourish in it. Oh, I'm already behind. I'm really bad for keeping track of my PowerPoint, so if you notice I'm behind, just mention it. Okay, so kids will flourish in a routine. It gives them a measure of control. They know what to expect. They know what's going to happen next in the classroom. Having a routine that you follow will minimize distracting questions of what's going to happen next. Sometimes you'll have their kids with their hands are up constantly. What are we doing games? What's going to happen next? When are we going to do craft? If you have a routine that you follow, kids will know when those things are going to happen. For older kids, it's a good idea to post the class routine. They can see it for themselves. If you have kids with special needs, certain special needs kids really like to know what the routine is in the class. They feel very safe and comfortable, so post it. Say, this is the order we're going to do things in this classroom, and post it on the wall. And that way too, if you get a child who's asking you in the middle of your lesson, when are we playing games? You just point at your routine poster. And you don't even need to answer the question. They can look for themselves, okay? So a routine is important for the schedule of your class, but it's also important for how you deal with discipline. Have a routine for how you discipline in your class. Talk about it to the kids so that they know what to expect. This is how we discipline in this class. This is what the consequences are. This is what's going to happen. So an example of what a discipline routine could look like. So there's a child who's misbehaving. The teacher goes to the child, crouches to their level, tells the child the rule that they broke. Is an assign here. Quite often kids don't even know what they did that was wrong. They need to be told. So you tell them, and then you tell them what the consequence is, then you give them a chance to behave well. If you see they're doing it again, you go back, you crouch down, you let them know the rule that was broken, the consequence, and then you act out the consequence, okay? And then once that's all done, welcome the child back to the group, welcome the child back to the activities. That's an example of a routine. So what you say may not be exactly the same every time. The consequence might be slightly different, but how you do that discipline is consistent. So consistency and routine. They're especially important if a class has multiple sets of teachers. This happens quite often in children's ministry, in Sunday school or whatever. The teachers rotate through. And so every teacher is different, every teacher teaches differently, has different personalities. This is where routine and consistency is really important. The teachers change, but the routine should never change. Okay? So consistency and routine. Number 2, preparation. Recently I volunteered at a nursery school, and it was a special day. It was Pumpkin Science Day. Yay! So the teacher planned a whole bunch of activities for the kids to do. They were going to measure their pumpkins and weigh their pumpkins and see what's inside their pumpkins and measure the circumference of their pumpkins. It was a lot of fun. Now this class had 14 4- and 5-year-olds and 1 teacher. And I was really impressed by how prepared this teacher was and how smoothly the class went. And I think that there is a direct correlation here. First, this teacher knew it was going to be a busy day, so she stepped up the volunteer helpers. Instead of 1, she brought in 7. I mean, we had pumpkins, we had knives, 7 helpers was much better than 1. Okay, so she was prepared ahead of time. Then she thought out what she wanted to do and how she was going to do it. She let the parents know ahead of time what was happening. The kids brought their own pumpkins, and she set up 5 stations around the room and had each activity planned, prepped. Everything she needed was in a bin at the station. She was prepared. When the helpers arrived, she got the kids busy playing, and then she told us what was going to happen, what our responsibilities were. And then she enjoyed her time with her class. It was so interesting. I watched her. She wasn't frazzled. She had 14 kids and 7 volunteers, and she was having a great time because she was prepared. And there were no discipline issues. I watched. The kids did not misbehave. The kids had a great time. This is an example of a really well-managed classroom because the teacher was prepared. Now, it is unlikely that any of you will have 7 helpers for your Sunday school class. If you do, let me know, because I don't want to know how that happened. So, there are some great principles from this example, though, that we can use. Prepare yourself. This means taking the time during the week to plan your class time, study your lesson, plan out illustrations, games, crafts, activities. What are you going to need? Get it all together. And pray for your class and for the lesson that you will teach. Once, when I was a director of children's ministry, I got a phone call from a panicked teacher at 8 o'clock Saturday night. 8 o'clock. She was just looking at her lesson for the following morning, and she realized she needed a bunch of stuff photocopied, and she needed a bunch of things for her activities. And we're a portable church, which means you need to do extra preparation to make sure it's going to be there on Sunday morning. And so she called me at 8 o'clock. I can only imagine what her class was like the next day. Even if she did get all that stuff together, she would have been in a heightened state of panic. And that kind of flows out to your kids. So be prepared. And preparing yourself also means having everything ready to go when your kids arrive. If you're not ready and you're prepping an activity or finishing up your lesson as the kids are coming into your room, they notice that you don't have time for them. They notice that they don't have your attention. And so some kids will try any way they can to get your attention, and that usually means acting out. Because it's negative attention when you do finally pay attention, but it's something. They want something from you. So if you're prepared and ready ahead of time, when the kids arrive, your attention's on them. You're interested, you're talking, and getting the kids involved in activities. Right from the start, you're ready to go. And there's less time for acting out or inappropriate behavior. So take the time you need to prepare yourself. And then second, prepare your classroom. When I volunteered for this pumpkin science day, the teacher had set the stage. She had all the stations ready, everything ready to go in bins. She was prepared, her classroom was prepared. She got rid of toys that may have been distracting. She put that stuff away. She took the time to prepare her classroom. When you know the goal of your morning, it will help you prepare your classroom. When you know ahead of time what you want to accomplish in your class, you can set up your room to help you accomplish that goal rather than have a bunch of things that are going to distract from that goal. So for example, put away toys that you're not going to be using and get rid of clutter in your classroom. Take the time to look at your room from a child's level and think what could be distracting from a child during the lesson. Are the things that we need to use easy for a child to get out and put back if they need to put back. So prepare yourself and prepare your classroom. Classroom management really is about setting kids up for success. You want them to learn and be engaged, so you want to minimize distractions and give them opportunities to show love and kindness to others. And one way to do that is to make sure you're prepared ahead of time and that your classroom is set up to enhance the learning experience and not distract from it. Okay, 3, expectations. Let the kids know what your expectations are. Teachers should never assume that kids understand what's expected of them in a classroom situation. Never assume that kids know how to behave in a classroom situation. So we're going to talk about reasonable expectations and how to let the kids know what those are. So first, it's important to remember that you need to teach kids how to behave in a classroom, especially younger children who have not yet gone to school. They don't have that experience. And surprisingly, you also need to make that connection for kids to say how you're expected to behave at school is the same, right? So, of not talking without raising your hand, all those behaviors that kids learn at school, those are classroom behaviors that are the same for Sunday school. So ensure that you tell your kids what's expected of them, and then make sure, though, that your classroom expectations are reasonable. Here you need to consider the age and the developmental ability of the kids in your class. 5-year-olds, for example, do not have the attention span to sit through a 30-minute story. If you try it, they're going to fail because they just developmentally can't sit that long for a story. It's unreasonable. However, 5-year-olds can sit through a 10 to 15-minute story that is engaging and interesting and interactive for them, age appropriate. That's a reasonable expectation. If you're not sure what kids can do developmentally, there are tons of resources out there. Go online and plug in age level characteristics. You will get tons of stuff about what kids can and can't do at certain ages. So make sure your expectations are reasonable. And then tell your kids what's expected of them for general classroom behavior. So this will be very similar to what they have to do at school. And for specific classroom situations. General classroom expectations include how kids should address you. Do you prefer to be called, I prefer to be called Mrs. Janelle, for example. Kids need to know that. How do you want them to address you? What are the rules? The kids need to know that you expect them to follow the rules. How should students treat each other? These are general classroom expectations. But you also need to tell kids how you expect them to behave for specific classroom situations. For example, if a child has a question at any time, they need to raise their hand and wait for you to respond. That's an expectation of behavior. In this class, we raise our hands and we have a question. Specific classroom expectations include story time, application time, games time, craft time, snack time, bathroom time. Those are specific situations, and you need to think through how do you expect kids to behave in those situations. Here's some examples of reasonable expectations. Any question asked will be about the lesson topic. That was one my husband did when he taught in grades 4 to 6. If you have a question, raise your hand, wait for me to respond. I expect everyone to participate during lesson time. After playtime, I expect everyone to clean up. Before we eat snack, everyone washes their hands. During application time, we will respect what each other has to say. These are examples of reasonable expectations. And just a note here, expectations and rules are different. Rules are important in your classroom. We're going to talk about that when we get to the discipline side of things. The expectation would be that students obey the rules. But expectations are also about stuff like bathroom and how to use the bathroom and washing your hands before snack and how to treat each other in the classroom. So expectations aren't always about rules or misbehavior. Sometimes it's just about how we behave with each other in a group setting. So don't make the assumption that children will know how to behave or participate in your class. Let them know what your expectations are and then watch them because they will rise to the challenge. Number 4, offer choices. Ryan was a great kid. He had a huge heart. I saw him do the kindest things for his little brother and the way he would treat other children. He had a big heart. But Ryan was also stubborn. He could dig his heels in like no kid I've ever seen. And so one morning, sometimes he just didn't want to come to Sunday school. One morning his teacher came to get me because he would not come into the classroom. She could not get him inside the door. His mom had already dropped him off and left, and he would not come in. And so I took a minute to talk to him and I said, you know what, Ryan? You're really important to us. We care about you, and we need you to be safe at Sunday school. And in order for us to make sure you're safe, you need to be inside the classroom where we can see you. So I need you to come inside. Would you like to sit on the bench by yourself, or would you like to sit here with your friends? I didn't give him the choice to come in to the classroom because that was a safety thing. He had to come in. I gave him a choice of what to do when he got in there. He may not have been ready to play with other kids. He did sit on the bench by himself. He still needed some quiet time, but he came in. I gave him a measure of control over the situation by giving him a choice. And because I gave him a choice, he didn't feel like he needed to dig his heels in so much. So within safe boundaries, I gave him a choice of what he could do. So here's 4 tips for offering choices in the classroom. First of all, make sure the choices are acceptable. And here, I mean acceptable to you. Another way to say it would be to make sure that you can live with either choice. This is important. So when you offer your class a choice, make sure both options are acceptable. So which of these 2 activities would you like to do? Then plan 2 activities that are fun, engaging, highlight the central theme, so that whichever one they choose, it's okay with you and it focuses on the theme of the morning. Another example of choice would be, would you like to continue playing or come join the story circle? This is an example of unacceptable choices. I don't want a kid to choose not to come to the story circle, right? We want all the kids to come for a story circle, so don't give them a choice that lets them choose not to come. So make sure the choices are acceptable. Then make sure the choices are legitimate. Kids will quickly pick up on the fact that you are not giving them significant choices, or real choices. When you're offering choices, you're letting kids practice taking responsibility and making decisions. So give them real choices. Would you rather work alone or with a partner? What should we do first? Should we have snack or should we play a game? Give them real choices and let them practice making decisions and accepting responsibility. And then make sure that the choices are significant. It's important that the choices you give kids are legitimate, but sometimes also make sure that they're significant. Give them opportunities to make important choices. So for example, if your class is planning a special party, let them get involved by choosing the theme. Give them a choice of themes for the party, for example. And then finally, make sure the kids know the rules about making choices. Tell them that you will offer them a choice, but if they refuse to choose, you're going to choose for them. Some kids will dig their heels in and say, I'm not choosing. And then, because they think, whoa, they don't know what to do with that. You choose for them, but you need to make sure that they know that ahead of time. Okay, so I'm going to give you a choice. If you don't choose either of them, I'm going to choose for you. So for example, when I teach Sunday school, one of my rules is that everybody does all the activities together. I teach 4 and 5-year-olds. So if I have a student who doesn't want to come and join Story Circle, then I would say to them, you know what, you need to come join us. That's not a choice, but I can give you a choice. Would you like to sit beside me, or would you like to sit beside John when you come to Story Circle? Okay, so you're giving them the choice. It's a real choice. Would you like to sit here? Would you like to sit here? And then if that child does not choose, they sit beside me. So they know that ahead of time, okay? So make sure they know the rules about choices. Give over some of the control in your classroom by offering acceptable, legitimate, significant choices. And give your kids an opportunity to practice decision-making and accepting responsibility. And you will be practicing solid classroom management. Okay, so we've talked about expectations. Let's talk now about reasonable consequences. A consequence is an effect, result, or outcome of something occurring earlier. Good classroom management uses reasonable consequences. When a teacher makes use of reasonable consequences in her classroom, she's teaching her kids to be accountable for their actions. I love this quote by Jodi Copart. She said, "The purpose of a consequence is to retrain the brain and transform the heart." I love that quote. I think it's good. The purpose of a consequence is to retrain the brain and transform the heart. The reason we use consequences is to help our kids retrain how they think, feel, and behave. So there's a good reason why we have consequences for behavior. But make sure that they're reasonable consequences. Kids will quickly pick up on anything that is unfair, on actions that they consider unfair. A reasonable consequence, by its very definition, can't be considered unfair. They might not like it, but they can't say that it's unfair. So for example, during snack time, a child spills their juice. An unreasonable consequence would be saying, oh, you spilled your juice, you're not allowed to have a snack for a month. That is unreasonable. A reasonable consequence would be, oh, I see you spilled your juice. Let me help you get a rag so you can clean it up. That's reasonable. You spill it, you clean it up. Okay? Keep in mind that consequences, again, aren't just for misbehavior. They're just about stuff that happens or choices that were made. So spilling your juice is not breaking the rules. It's not misbehavior. You just spilt your juice. But there's still a consequence involved. Your juice is gone. You need to clean it up. You need to get more juice. Okay? So reasonable consequences are about teaching kids the results of choices, which is why it's important for them to continue through that process to get to the consequence. I made a choice, this happened, this is the consequence. Okay? So some examples of reasonable consequences are, if a child plays with a toy, they put it away. If they spill their juice, they clean it up. If they spill a child's juice, one of their friends' juices, they clean it up and get a new drink for their friend. If they hurt someone, they need to apologize and see what they can do about making it right. These are reasonable consequences. Teach your kids that they're responsible for their behavior and the results of their behavior.